The early morning chill hung in the air as Officer Jalen Carter tightened the straps of his bulletproof vest, adjusting it with practiced ease. At 34 years old, he was a seasoned officer with nearly a decade of experience in the force. His tall, athletic build carried an air of authority, yet his deep brown eyes, set against the contrast of his rich, dark skin, reflected something softer: empathy, patience, and a silent resilience. Born and raised in Ashton, a mid-sized town in Georgia, Jalen had grown up understanding both the power and the burden of being a black man in America. His parents had instilled in him a deep sense of justice. His mother, a retired school teacher, had always preached education as a tool for empowerment. His father, a former firefighter, had taught him that saving lives wasn't about choosing who was deserving. It was about doing what was right, no matter the circumstances. His career in law enforcement was never about power. It was about representation, service, and proving that integrity mattered. But that didn't mean it was easy. Jalen's mornings started the same way. A 5 a.m. run, followed by a quick shower, then black coffee, no sugar, no cream. He'd watch the news in silence as he laced up his boots, mentally preparing himself for whatever the day would bring. By 7 a.m., he was in his patrol car, cruising through the streets of Ashton. The town was a blend of old history and modern tension, a place where Confederate flags still waved on certain porches, yet where young activists painted murals of unity on city walls. For Jalen, every shift was a delicate balance. To some, he was a hero. To others, just another cop. To a few, he was a traitor to his own people. He had learned to tune out the whispers, to focus on his duty. His partner, Officer Mike Reynolds, a burly, red-headed man with a thick Georgia accent, had once been skeptical of him. But after years on patrol together, the two had developed an unspoken trust. "Man, I don't know how you stay so calm," Mike had once said after a particularly tense traffic stop. Jalen had smirked. "You learn real quick that getting mad don't solve nothing." Ashton wasn't the most divided town in America, but it wasn't the most progressive either. There were places Jalen knew he'd always be watched a little too closely. Restaurants where the service was slower when he wasn't in uniform, gas stations where he'd get an extra long stare before being handed his receipt. And then there was Dale Richardson. A vocal and unapologetic racist, Dale was a 56-year-old mechanic who had made his views known on every possible occasion. From Facebook rants about how police forces were becoming too diverse, to barroom debates about how, back in my day, cops weren't so soft, Dale had built a reputation for being a walking controversy. Jalen had encountered him more times than he cared to count. Whether it was breaking up one of his drunken altercations at the local bar or responding to a noise complaint at his garage, Dale always had a comment, a sneer, or a challenge ready. "Bet you got this job just to feel powerful, huh?" Dale had once spat at him during an arrest. Jalen had only responded with silence. But beneath Jalen's professional composure, there was frustration. He had sworn an oath to serve and protect, even those who hated him for nothing more than the color of his skin. That day, as Jalen parked his patrol car outside a coffee shop, he didn't know his world was about to shift. He didn't know that in just a few hours, he'd be kneeling beside Dale Richardson, performing CPR on the very man who had wished him harm countless times. And he definitely didn't know that the words he would say afterward would go viral, sparking a conversation far beyond the streets of Ashton. The static hum of the police radio broke the quiet of the squad car. Unit 12, possible medical emergency at Richardson's Auto Repair. 911 caller reports an unresponsive male. No further details. Jalen's jaw tightened at the name. Richardson's Auto Repair. There was no mistaking it. This was Dale Richardson's place. Mike glanced over. "Ain't that?" "Yeah," Jalen cut in, flipping on the siren. In less than 3 minutes, they pulled up to the shop, a rundown garage on the edge of town. A small crowd had gathered, mostly employees, looking helpless. The overhead bay door was open, and inside, sprawled on the oil-streaked concrete, was Dale Richardson. Pale, not moving. Jalen was out of the car before he could think twice. Jalen dropped to one knee, assessing the situation. Dale's skin was clammy, his breathing shallow, if he was breathing at all. His lips were tinged blue, and his chest barely moved. Heart attack. Jalen's training kicked in. He tilted Dale's head back, checked for a pulse. Weak, erratic. Call EMS again, he barked at one of the bystanders. No time to hesitate. He laced his fingers together, placed them over Dale's sternum, and began chest compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4. The garage smelled like motor oil and rust, but all Jalen could focus on was the weight beneath his hands, the fragile rhythm of a life slipping away. A man who had spent years spewing hate. A man who wouldn't have lifted a finger for him. But none of that mattered. Come on, Dale, Jalen muttered between compressions. The irony wasn't lost on him. Here he was, a black officer fighting to keep a man alive who had once told him to go back where he came from. Dale's employees stood frozen. Mike knelt beside him. You sure you want to be the one doing this? Jalen shot him a look. What do you think? Mike exhaled, shaking his head. Didn't say you shouldn't. Just saying, world's funny, ain't it? Jalen didn't answer. He kept pressing down, pushing air through Dale's ungrateful lungs. Seconds stretched into eternity. Then, a ragged gasp. Dale's chest heaved, his body jerking as his heart restarted. Dale's eyelids fluttered. His gaze, unfocused, landed on the man kneeling over him. For a second, confusion crossed his face. Then, realization. Jalen sat back on his heels, panting. Dale's lips barely moved. You? Jalen didn't flinch. Yeah, me. A long pause. Dale blinked, as if struggling to reconcile reality. Jalen, the man he had insulted, degraded, and mocked, was the reason he was alive. The crowd was silent. Even Mike seemed unsure of what to say. Then the sirens wailed in the distance, breaking the moment apart. Jalen stood, wiping sweat from his brow. He looked down at Dale, his voice steady. Doesn't matter what you think of me. When it comes down to it, I'll still try to save you. Dale just stared. Jalen turned away as the paramedics rushed in. He didn't need a thank you. He just needed to breathe. By the time Jalen and Mike returned to the station, the incident was already making waves. News travels fast in a small town, especially when it's something controversial. Jalen had barely stepped into the locker room when Officer Jared Collins, one of the younger cops on the force, whistled low. So, Carter, what's it feel like saving a guy who'd probably spit on your boots if he had the chance? Jalen didn't look up as he unfastened his vest. Feels like doing my job. Collins snorted. Man, I don't know if I'd have wasted my energy. Mike cut in, voice sharp. That's 'cause you don't got half the discipline he does. Jalen shot his partner a quick glance, a silent thanks. Collins shrugged. Hey, I'm just saying. Some people don't deserve saving. Jalen finally turned to face him. His voice was even, but his eyes burned. Then we ain't cops. We're just picking favorites. Collins held up his hands in surrender. All right. Damn, man. But the conversation stuck. Because deep down, a small part of Jalen had thought the same thing. Later that evening, Jalen sat in his patrol car, parked just outside the hospital. He wasn't sure why he was there. He had no intention of going inside. He wasn't looking for gratitude. Hell, he knew better than to expect it. But still, a text from Mike lit up his phone. Saw the news. Jalen frowned and opened his browser. There it was. Racist saved by black cop. His response might shock you. Jalen exhaled through his nose. Click. A grainy news clip played. Dale Richardson, still in a hospital bed, looked weary but alive. The reporter spoke. Mr. Richardson, how do you feel knowing Officer Carter was the one who saved your life? Dale coughed, adjusting his pillow. Then, after a long pause, he muttered, well, he was just doing his job. Ain't got much else to say. Jalen's stomach tightened. Of course. No thanks. No acknowledgement. Just another dismissal. He locked his phone and stared out at the darkening sky. Mike was right. The world was funny. By the next morning, the internet had taken over. Some people praised Jalen. Officer Carter is the kind of cop we need more of. Professional. Selfless. Others weren't so kind. Man saved a racist just for him to turn around and act like it was nothing. Waste of effort. And then there were those who turned Dale into a symbol of what was wrong with America. Even at death's door, this man couldn't swallow his pride. This is what hate does to people. Jalen scrolled through the comments, his jaw tightening. Was this what he wanted? To become a talking point? The final straw came that afternoon. Jalen was filling out paperwork at his desk when his captain, Robert Willis, stepped in. "Carter, got a minute?" Jalen followed him into his office. The captain gestured to his computer screen. A headline glared back at him. Viral debate. Should Carter have saved him? Jalen's stomach twisted. "People are talking," Willis said. "Some see you as a hero. Others, well, let's just say not everyone's thrilled." Jalen clenched his jaw. Not surprised. Willis studied him. "Look, Carter, I know you don't care about recognition, but people are waiting for a response. Maybe it's time you say something." Jalen hesitated. "What am I supposed to say?" The captain leaned forward. "Whatever's on your mind." Jalen swallowed hard, because he wasn't sure if people were ready for what he had to say. But maybe it was time they heard it anyway. That night, Jalen sat in his apartment, staring at the blinking cursor on his phone screen. He had never been one for social media statements. But this wasn't just about him anymore. People were arguing in the comments, twisting the situation into something political, something ugly. They were asking the wrong questions. So Jalen did what felt right. He pressed record. The screen lit up, reflecting his steady gaze. "I've been quiet long enough." His voice was calm but firm. "I didn't save Dale Richardson because he deserved it. I didn't do it because I expected a thank you. And I sure as hell didn't do it for the headlines." He exhaled, leaning forward. "I did it because it was the right thing to do. That's it." His fingers drummed against the table. "But let me be real with y'all for a second." His tone sharpened. "The fact that this is even a debate, that people are out here asking if I should have let him die, that tells me everything I need to know." Jalen shook his head. "We got a long way to go." A long pause. Then, he finished. "Hate doesn't get to decide who's worth saving. But the way we respond to kindness, that's on us." He ended the video, hit post, and set the phone down. By morning, the video had gone viral. Millions of views. Thousands of comments. "This is the most powerful thing I've heard in a long time. We need more men like Officer Carter." Imagine hating someone so much that you can't even say thank you. But not everyone agreed. He's playing the victim. Dale didn't owe him anything. This is why people don't trust cops. Always looking for praise. Jalen knew better than to read too much into it. But the truth was undeniable. His words had struck a nerve. That afternoon, Jalen was finishing up his shift when a familiar voice stopped him in his tracks. "Carter." Jalen turned. Dale Richardson stood in the doorway. He looked rough, pale, tired, but alive. The hospital bracelet was still on his wrist. His usual arrogance seemed dimmed. For a long moment, they just stared at each other. Then Dale cleared his throat. "Guess I owe you one." Jalen folded his arms. "Is that why you're here?" Dale sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "I saw the video." Jalen raised an eyebrow. "And?" Dale hesitated. Then, for the first time, his voice softened. "Never thought I'd be the guy on the other side of this." His jaw tightened. "And I sure as hell never thought. Someone like you would be the one saving me." Jalen's expression didn't change. "Someone like me?" Dale swallowed. "A black cop. Honest. No sugarcoating." Jalen studied him. "You ever ask yourself why that is?" Dale didn't answer. But in that silence, Jalen saw something shift. A crack in the wall. A moment of reckoning. Dale nodded once. Then, voice gruff, he muttered, "Thanks," and walked away. Dale Richardson's quiet thanks wasn't an apology. It wasn't redemption. But it was something. Jalen didn't expect miracles. He didn't expect Dale to wake up the next day and suddenly change his beliefs. That's not how the world worked. But what mattered was what came next. Over the following weeks, the conversation didn't die down. Local news stations picked up Jalen's viral video. National outlets followed. His words, about doing the right thing, about hate not deciding who deserves saving, were quoted, dissected, debated. Some people got it. Some never would. But Jalen hadn't said it for them. He had said it for the ones who needed to hear it. One evening, Jalen stopped at a gas station after his shift. He wasn't expecting anything unusual. Then, as he stepped inside, he spotted Dale. Jalen almost kept walking. Almost. But Dale caught his eye and gave him a small nod. Not big, not exaggerated, just acknowledgement. And then, as Jalen grabbed his coffee, Dale did something he had never done before. He paid for it. Didn't make a big deal out of it. Didn't say anything. Just left the cash on the counter and walked out. Jalen watched him go, shaking his head with a quiet chuckle. Some people apologize with words. Others? With actions. Maybe, just maybe, Dale was starting to learn. Later that night, Jalen sat on his porch, staring up at the stars. This wasn't the first time he had to be the bigger person. It wouldn't be the last. And honestly, he was tired. But as much as the world tested him, as much as people like Dale made him question whether any of it was worth it, Jalen knew one thing. He would never let hate make him choose who deserved kindness. Because once you start picking and choosing, you become just like the people you stand against. And that wasn't who he was. His phone vibrated. A notification. Another comment on his viral post. He didn't open it. Instead, he set the phone down, leaned back, and closed his eyes. Tomorrow, there'd be more debates. More people dissecting his choices. But right now, he was at peace. Jalen's story reminds us of an uncomfortable truth. Doing the right thing isn't always easy, and it won't always be appreciated. But that doesn't mean it's not worth doing. If this story resonated with you, let's keep the conversation going. Like, share, and comment below. What would you have done in Jalen's position? And if you want more stories that challenge perspectives and spark debate, subscribe for more. Because sometimes, the hardest conversations are the ones we need the most.